an old story that's relevant to the questions that have been asked. How do we know that we know? And how do we know that we have the proper authority? The story is about that king who ruled over a prosperous and harmonized kingdom, that he was coming and was at the end of his life and his reign. So he called his only and his beloved son to him, and he said, "Son, you have learned the ways of warriorship, you've learned the ways of scholarship, and you've learned the ways of statesmanship. But in order to take over this kingdom, you must pass the test that I had to pass, and my father before me, and my father's father before that. Down in the depths of this palace, there is confined a great, fierce, wild tiger. The test is that you must go and face this tiger." Now the prince immediately started to quake in his shoes and sweat with fear, because the biggest fear in his life was tigers. He had been out on a hunt on a great elephant with his father one day when he witnessed a great wild tiger tearing apart a man. So his father the king said to the prince, "Tomorrow you will be taken to the depths of the palace to confront this test." Now that night the prince tossed and turned and sweated, the fear being totally palpable and overwhelming to him. So great was his fear that in the middle of the night he got up and dressed himself in the garb of a peasant and crept out of the palace and out of the palace gates. He wandered seemingly aimlessly for some time and for the whole day. But as night was approaching the next day, he looked and saw a light in the distance and found that it was a farmhouse. So he made his way there, seeking hospitality for the night. Now it so happened that the prince was like a carbon copy of his father, and even though he was dressed in peasant's garb, the resemblance was so great that all the people knew who he was. So when he knocked on the door of the farmhouse, the farmer immediately recognized him as the son of the king and welcomed him in with great hospitality, feeding him and offering him a place for the night. But during the night, the prince was awoken by sounds outside his window, and when he looked out in the moonlight, he could see two shining green eyes. In the morning, when he awoke and he told the farmer what he had seen, the farmer said, "Oh yes, we have a wild tiger that comes sometimes to eat our chickens and other animals. But of course, this evoked fear again in the prince. So when the farmer offered hospitality, saying to him, "Please stay as long as you like," the prince said, "No, no, 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 I have to leave, I have to go on." And so he left and continued his wanderings until he came to the very edge of his father's kingdom. Now at the edge of that kingdom there was a fortress, because there was always danger that one king would invade another. So a garrison of soldiers was kept there on that border. So again, the prince, when he arrived at this fort, he was immediately recognized by the head of the soldier who was there. And again he was offered hospitality for the night. It was very hospitable and raucous, as only soldiers can be, and many stories were told. But after imbibing, of course, as soldiers do, the head of the soldiers said to the prince, "Oh, you've come just at the right time, because tomorrow we're going on a tiger hunt." So, of course, the prince, so terrified, woke up early in the morning and thanking all the soldiers for their hospitality, said, I have to go. So, of course, now the prince found himself in another kingdom. But as is the way with these things, word had already been passed to the monarch of that new realm, that the prince of this realm was now entering his kingdom. So when the prince came close to the capital of that great place, he was welcomed like a prince would be welcomed, even though he was still wearing his so-called disguise. But having been feted by the king of this realm and invited to stay as long as he wanted, there was the opportunity for the prince to meet the princess, the daughter of this king, a beautiful, gracious, gentle soul. So our prince immediately fell in love and wanted this princess for himself. Now, having been recognized as a prince, and knowing indeed that he was worthy in that sense to ask for the hand of this maiden in marriage, he went to the king of that realm and stated that he would like to make his daughter his bride. And the king said, "Certainly, if my daughter is willing, I will be happy for you to be wed. Come, my daughter at this moment is out in the garden. Let us go and ask her for ourselves." But when the king and the prince went out into the garden, there was the princess sitting on a beautiful sofa, and at her feet was a magnificent wild tiger. Immediately the prince began to sweat and shake, his fear so great that he could not take his eyes off this beast, hardly noticing the love that had welled up in him at his meeting with her. But recognizing in that moment that there was no possibility that he could be worthy to claim the hand of this maiden when he had such fear in his heart. He went to the king of that realm and said, I must leave. There is something that I must do before I can claim the hand of your beautiful daughter. So the prince made his way back to his own kingdom, where he fell on his knees before his father, the king, and apologized, but stating, now I am ready. Take me to the tiger. So with that there was great fanfare, and with great ceremony a dagger was brought from the coffers with its beautiful ivory handle, sharp, a stiletto of kinds, and this was handed to the prince, and he was escorted down the stairs of the palace to the bowels of that great edifice. And there in front of him was the door, and when he looked in the grill that was inserted in that door, he saw this wild beast pacing back and forth, back and forth. And again his fear welled up in his heart and in his throat. But with great resolution he asked his father to open the door, and he entered, standing whilst the great beast paced back and forth. The prince was just about to raise the dagger, the stiletto, thinking that the tiger was about to leap and pounce upon him. To his very great surprise, the great animal came over and rubbed itself against his legs, opened its throat to be caressed by the prince's hand. There was great celebration outside that room, and the prince was taken out of that place amidst great rejoicing. And his father said, of course, you see, this was the test that I, my father, and my father's father have had to undergo. And now the prince knew that he was ready, and so with great pomp and ceremony he rode to claim his bride. In the story told the other day, the story of genie in the bottle, that genie that, if we translate it in recognition that every element of every story is a part of ourself, this genie could be said to represent what is called our God self. But in this story, the genie is confined to the bottle, but it's known that the genie cannot tell a lie, that the genie can exert power from within the bottle, but does not have the power to release itself. So could it be when we acknowledge this genie, that we know that we know. But perhaps this story will allow us to answer the question, how do we know we have the proper authority? Must we pass a test like the story indicates? And is it to face our deepest fears? And if so, can we not recognize that our greatest fear is the power of that genie? The power of life? Keeping it reined in, caged, sublimated, quelled? So what does this story tell us? What is it that triggers us to find the courage to face that fear? What's your experience? What's our experience? I can tell you mine. In the time with my husband, there came a time when he, because of his own fears, tried to denigrate Divine Mother, the one that I loved beyond all else, the one I considered to be God incarnate. And whilst up until that time there had been a subservience, when there was that attempt to denigrate and bring down that which was loved and considered to be the epitome, the exemplar of the God Self, my tiger was released. Not just a tiger, but a lion. So that greatest fear was faced. What has it been for you? What has been the test, if yet, to release that power? Not just knowing that we know, but knowing that we have the proper authority.